You're always looking for that boom pick in fantasy football. It's playoff time. You definitely need some of these guys who can come through big for you. Last week we took a chance, on a first round pick that had a shot. Justin Jefferson, yeah, didn't work.
Nope, definitely did not work out.
So you know what, this week, let's try it again. Now, we break down all the matchups and look for those players with big upside. We're going to tell you who we think could go off huge this week. First, help us get to our goal. If you haven't subscribed yet, you still got time. If you're new to the channel, whether you've been watching for a while, whatever the case, go ahead and check and see if you've hit that subscribe button yet. If you haven't, do it now. Help us get to 100K. So here we go, and it still feels weird, but I'm going to say you're going to take a chance in recommending Saquon Barkley. That's right, guy who is in some leagues the number one overall pick, the very least a top 5, let's face it, top 3 pick in every fantasy draft because he was the number 1 player in all fantasy last season. And so predictably, like everything that has been upside down this season, it's been the opposite. He hasn't been unstartable, but how good do you really feel about him in your lineup these days? But more importantly, when's the last time he actually had a big game? Last week. Out of all the crazy things that happened in the Eagles game, well, let's see, Jalen Hurts having the worst game of his life, and then Saquon Barkley actually looking good on the ground. That was up there because honestly, this was a surprise to see him look so efficient. This was his first 100-yard game since he faced his former team, the Giants, which we know are horrible run defense. And so we gotta say, is this something, right? Is this the start of maybe a little bit of last year's Saquon? Remember, he did get stronger as the year went on toward the end of last season, and they need him. This team is reeling. They've lost 3 in a row, even with Barkley rushing effectively on the ground. And so with the way Hurts looked and the way Barkley looked, you got to wonder, are they just going to continue to feed him and see if this is this answer to some of their problems?
It could be, and they should do that, absolutely, and especially this week because they get the Raiders. Now, the Raiders are bad at everything. This just feels like a get-right spot for the Eagles this week at home against the Raiders, but especially Saquon Barkley. Look at it. Somehow the Raiders, for as bad as they've been, have been even worse recently. Over the last 2 games, they've allowed the 5th most points to running backs, but they've allowed almost 300 rushing yards over the last 2 games and have given up 3 touchdowns while allowing 4.8 yards per carry. But even on the season, they've been terrible against the run. They have given up they're tied for the 3rd most rushing touchdowns allowed here. And like I said, this feels like a bounce back spot. You look at it right now, the Eagles are 11.5-point home favorites. This feels like a game where they are just going to be able to run the ball, win comfortably, bounce back, fix this ship that's, kind of off course right now. And I think it starts with Saquon Barkley. Not to mention, Saquon Barkley has a fantastic playoff schedule. It wouldn't surprise me if you're still alive with Saquon Barkley, if he still helps you win a fantasy championship this year. And I think it starts this week against the Raiders. But also, what I think he's going to help you do this week is win your underdog pick. That's right. Let's take his touchdown line. He could find the end zone against the Raiders. Let's go higher on his touchdown line on underdog. And if you're a new customer, you're going to get a gimme pick that you can pair with the Saquon Barkley line. Easy win right off the bat. Not to mention, when you join using promo code ENDGAME, you're also going to get a 50% deposit match up to $1,000 in bonus cash. Plus, as soon as you play just $5 on any pick'em, win or lose, they're going to give you another $100 in bonus cash. Go to Underdog Fantasy, sign up using promo code ENDGAME, try it out, and take advantage of all the free bonus cash.
Let's get to another stud player who, he let down for the first time in a while last week. George Pickens seemed like he was in a perfect spot to just completely smash against the Lions, and he did the opposite. And in fact, a lot of chatter about whether he was giving out full effort or not, short-arming the ball, just seemed kind of disinterested at times. This is the Pickens experience, right? A lot of ups and sometimes some downs as well. It's been mostly up, though, this season. Remember, for the past 8 weeks before last week, he had been the number 2 overall receiver in terms of fantasy points total. He was just dominant. And then what happened? I don't know. It's hard to explain. It's just one of those games. It was a great spot for him. And so now the thing is, this week, it seems like it's not a great spot for him, right? The matchup is actually far tougher, but this actually could be kind of a sneaky good spot for Pickens, which, whether you think he's motivated or not, keep in mind, the Cowboys still do have a very slim chance to make the playoffs, right? They're going to try as hard as they can. And George Pickens is heading into free agency. I mean, I think he's proven himself, but he needs to finish strong, doesn't he? I mean, there's actually a good reason he could do so this week.
Yeah, exactly. You look at on paper, if you just look at like fantasy points, you think, oh, tough matchup versus the Vikings. But when you look a little deeper, you realize something here. Teams just don't throw to the wide receivers against the Vikings because most weeks they just don't need to do anything against the Vikings because the Vikings offense has been so bad. On the year, the Vikings have faced the fewest wide receiver targets against, but they've allowed the 5th highest yards per target on those targets. In fact, they rank 10th in fantasy points allowed per target on the season. And if you look at only the games where they allowed 15 or more targets to wide receivers, and to put that in perspective of how low of a bar that is, there are only 6 teams in the NFL that throw to their wide receivers less than 15 times a game. And they're probably the offenses you would expect, some of the worst offenses in the NFL. When you take the games where they've faced just a minimum of 15 targets to wide receivers, they've allowed the 6th most fantasy points to wide receivers over those games. And the nice thing about the Cowboys here is, yes, they should win this game, but the defense is so bad, even with the changes they've made, especially against the pass, that they're always in games where they have to continue to throw the ball. Not to mention, the Cowboys have the most targets on the season going to wide receivers. Over 300 targets to wide receivers, by far the most in the NFL. They're averaging over 23 targets per game to the wide receivers. George Pickens is going to get a ton of targets in this game against a sneaky bad defense against wide receivers. And like you said, coming off that bad game last week where people are kind of like questioning his effort, you know he's going to come out on fire this week because like you said, he wants to get paid next year.
Now, a receiver who did get paid finally, but maybe has paid the price for missing some time in training camp is Terry McLaurin. Not having his best season. I mean, he struggled just to stay on the field, and that's a big part of the problem, that quad issue. He missed several games. And of course, quarterback Jaden Daniels missing a vast majority of the season, possibly the rest of the season, who knows. Well, he's definitely not coming back. He's already been ruled out for week 15. So why would we think that Terry McLaurin would all of a sudden have a big game, especially after this past week, having another kind of just mediocre performance? In fact, since his latest comeback from injury, right, since early in the season, he played a game, he missed a couple more weeks, came back again. Those 3 games, we've seen 54, 96, and 41 yards. So more bad than good, and all 3 of those games, they lost. I mean, Washington is just on a downside. So again, you got to wonder, what is the upside here? He's still got Marcus Mariota there. Got Terry McLaurin, who's been inconsistent at best. But, of course, you know what I'm going to say. It's the matchup. Those last 3 games where Terry has been active, those were very, very tough matchups. They lost, not just because that's what Washington has done this year, but we're talking about Minnesota, Denver, and Kansas City. All 3 of those defenses are in the top 12 in scoring defense and pass yards allowed. And they're also, all 3 of them are in the top 6 in terms of passing touchdowns allowed, meaning the fewest amount. Those are tough teams to pass on, really tough defenses. So of course they were going to struggle. And so the thing is with Terry, he's still involved. He's got a pretty solid 26.2% first read target share. And that is just going to go up because remember, Zach Ertz, he's done for the season. So even if Washington doesn't really have a lot to play for this week, and even with Mariota at quarterback, this matchup has got to tempt you.
It's got to tempt you against the Giants here. They've allowed the 3rd most points to wide receivers on the year over the last month. They were allowing the 5th most points to wide receivers. They also play single high coverage at the 7th highest rate, almost 60% of the time. Terry McLaurin dominates single high coverage. You look at it on the season, in the games that he has actually played, he is 7th in targets per route run versus single high and 17th in yards per route run versus single high among all wide receivers. And I know some people are going to say like, oh, but it's Marcus Mariota. Well, you talked about it. What did we see 2 weeks ago with Marcus Mariota when Terry returned from injury against the Broncos? He went off in that game, and that was a very tough matchup. I'm throwing last week out the window. Jaden Daniels did not look right, and then Mariota had to come in the second half in a game they were getting destroyed in and try to play. I mean, you just throw that one out the window. I think this week we're going to see a bounce back from Terry McLaurin. Marcus Mariota Look, they might even be able to beat the Giants. Maybe not, but they might be able to, but it should be a competitive game. They still want to finish strong here. This is a great spot for Terry McLaurin. I'm not scared at all here. I'm still firing him up with confidence.
Let's get back to running back and another player coming off a down week. So we have seen now Quinshon Judkins start to become a lot more inconsistent as well. Just when you thought you could trust him, no, then he started to go on a downslide. And then last week, before week 14, we saw 91 yards on the ground. Well, here we go. He's back. And then 26 yards last week. Didn't score. He had a pretty rough game overall, even though the fact that the Browns actually scored a ton of points. They still lost, but granted, like, okay, now all of a sudden, is this going to be a pass-heavy team with Shedeur Sanders emerging? No, it's not. I don't think that's what they want to do. In fact, I'm pretty sure they don't want Shedeur Sanders to have to sit back and throw the ball 30, 40 plus times. They want to control, the ground game here and do it on defense as well. They just couldn't do it on defense last week. But this is a game where you feel like it's going to be both ground games going at it. And, for what it's worth, I think Shedeur Sanders actually throwing for a ton of yards, this is good for the running game. How could it not be? The problem is when you don't have any real threat in terms of the pass game, defenses can stack the box. They know what's coming. And now maybe this opens things up a little bit for Shedeur Sanders. But moreover, he's probably going to get a ton of carries in this game that looks like it could be really, really cold.
Yeah, really cold. And I think probably really close too, which is going to be good for him. And, 2 weeks ago, in that matchup, we liked them. And then I talked about it last week against Tennessee. Like, Tennessee, not a good, matchup for running backs. But now he does get another good matchup for running backs against the Bears. I mean, if you look at it on the season, you're like, well, they're just like middle of the pack against running backs as far as fantasy points go. But they're allowing the 5th highest yards per carry at 4.93 yards per carry. They've allowed 3 of their last 4 opponents to go over 90 yards. 2 of those opponents went over 100 yards. What I really like here, and I talked about this earlier in the year, the Bears are allowing the 2nd highest adjusted yards before contact per attempt, which is great for a guy like Quinshon Judkins because he's one of the lowest in terms of yards before contact per attempt because the Browns' offensive line, the run blocking isn't great. And like you said, teams can just stack the box. I talked about this way back in week 4 when we put Ashton Genty on the booms. And I said, one thing that has held Ashton Genty back is the offensive line. He's not getting any yards before contact. It's like he's got to make guys miss before he even gets to the line of scrimmage. I said the Bears are the remedy for that. And what happened in that game? He ran for 138 yards on 21 carries. By far his best game of the season so far. This is the remedy the Browns running game needs. This Bears defensive line that gets pushed around by every offensive line in the NFL. I think this is a bounce back spot for Judkins this week. We're going to see the guy more like week 13 than the guy we saw last week.
All right, now let's get a little deeper. We did it last week, giving you a spicy pick, a guy who, well, we can't guarantee he's going to go off, but has a good chance. You know what? It's JJ. Again, just a different one. It's Juwan Jennings. Come on, we can't start Justin Jefferson these days. What are you thinking? But Juwan Jennings, you absolutely should feel great about because he gets that Tennessee defense, and this is a great spot coming off the bye. And this 49ers offense as a whole is already getting healthy, getting back to doing what they do, which is pile up points. And they need to do it more than before because that defense is still decimated by injury. Well, look, the Browns may hate Juwan Jennings. Clearly they do. I don't even know if his own coach and GM like Juwan Jennings, but it seems like Brock Purdy likes him enough. He is targeting him. Jennings lately has been more of a floor guy. Granted, he's been pretty consistent, but not really giving you that ceiling. He's had at least 4 receptions for 7 straight games. Now, the problem is just 4 receptions with modest yardage like he's done the last 3 games. He's averaged 43 yards. That doesn't excite you. That makes you wonder, do I flex a guy like this? This week, you can and feel good about it. He's clearly the number 1 receiver there because Ricky Pearsall is out there but non-existent. He's combined for 20 yards over the last 3 games. Like, this is a week where Jennings could step up big.
Yeah, and I just talked about it. The Titans are a team you throw the ball against because they have Jeffrey Simmons in the middle of that defensive line. They are a tough team to run on, and I know we've made the mistake a couple of times this year saying like, oh, this running back against the Titans should smash. No, you gotta stop thinking that way. It's the passing game that smashes versus the Titans. They've allowed the highest pass rate over expectation. Teams just choose to throw against the Titans. Not only that, they're allowing the 8th most fantasy points to wide receivers, the 6th most points to wide receivers lined up on the outside, the 2nd highest yards per target at 9.71 yards per target. They've allowed every single receiving group to go over 100 yards this year. Every single one. They have not held any team to under 100 receiving yards, and they are allowing an average of 164 receiving yards per game, which is 6th worst in the NFL. Like you said, I mean, maybe Pierre can do something in this matchup, but Jennings is the guy Brock Purdy looks to first and foremost. He's the end zone target. He's got the upside this week. I think Jennings is a guy you got to lock in as an upside flex this week.
Now, as usual, we're going to take turns picking another guy we like. And I got to say, this week, your pick feels a little spicy as well.
I mean, maybe, but I really love Woody Marks this week. I feel like every year we see rookies, and we're seeing it probably with like RJ Harvey this year as well. Maybe Travion Henderson if he can somehow pull away from Ramondre, which we'll see. But we see these rookie running backs, especially like the very end of the season in the fantasy playoffs, really take off. I think that's going to be Woody Marks this year. You look at, he's been an absolute workhorse the last 4 games. 70% of the snaps, 70% of the rushing attempts. He's 14th among all running backs in expected fantasy points per game over the last month. But look at last week when Nick Chubb left that game early, his role took off like crazy. 89% of the snaps, 83% of the rush attempts, had almost a 10% target share, and he was 6th among all running backs in expected fantasy points. And the only reason it wasn't higher is because he had to get pulled out for a concussion check, and Darway O vultured the touchdown from him. He would have been even better here. Now he gets his Arizona defense that is just decimated. I mean, the whole Arizona team is decimated right now. They just allowed Kyron Williams and Blake Corum to go for over 200 yards and 3 touchdowns combined. They're allowing the 2nd most fantasy points to running backs since week 10, and they've allowed 8 rushing touchdowns in the last 5 games. That is insane. Also, Texans, we know that defense. They're 9.5-point favorites at home. They are going to give Woody Marks plenty of chances to run the football in this game. They're not going to be playing from behind. Again, I think Woody Marks has the look of that late season rookie running back that takes over when it matters most, helps you win a fantasy championship. He also has a fantastic schedule. It starts this week, and I think he smashes.
Well, you got a rookie running back. I'm going the other way with a veteran wide receiver. Let's go Stephon Diggs, revenge game, part 2. Now, look, it's not just the fact that he obliterated his former team, the Bills, the first time they met several weeks ago, had 10 catches for 146 yards. He may not do that again, but I do think that he's going to get fed because they're going to need him. Look, I understand that I've been saying, and I mean it when I say I do not trust Josh McDaniels. This is why we don't know whether we should start Travion Henderson on a weekly basis or not. We don't know which receiver is going to get the ball. We don't know what to expect. And that, I think, the unpredictability and how he tries to, use somebody different every other week is what makes this so predictable. Because Stephon Diggs has not been used lately the last couple of weeks before their bye. The last 2 games, a total of 5 receptions for 46 yards, right? It's like he just fell off. I don't think he just fell off. They just didn't throw it to him because they didn't really need to throw much at all, period. Those 2 games, the Patriots played the Giants and the Bengals. As you know, those are 2 of the worst run defenses in the league. I mean, this is not anything that made them feel like they had to put their foot in the gas pedal offensively. Wasn't much of a contest there, especially against the Giants. So I'm not worried about that. The volume just wasn't there. They're going to need to pass the ball against this Buffalo defense. We talked about it on the start sit, and this seems like an obvious smash for the running backs. Buffalo's run defense has been better, which means New England will have to pass more than they like. I mean, this is a game that's going to be a battle. These teams are fighting for the division, fighting for playoff seeding. Stephon Diggs is the best player in that New England offense. I think they're going to go to him as much as they can. And look, according to fantasy points, this is a great spot for him coverage-wise. He's got one of the highest expected fantasy points per route this week. He's in the top 15 among all receivers who they've charted. This could be another big game for Diggs. I'm going to take a chance on him. All right, let's hope that those guys help you win your week because it is the playoffs. You need to survive and advance. Of course, you got plenty of other questions. That's why we're here. Don't forget to check out all the videos we have for Week 15 in this week's playlist.